Earlier this morning, Addison spoke about God calling Abraham to action in the beginning of Abraham's journey. I'd like to return to that seminal moment at the outset of Jewish history and pose what is perhaps the most obvious question of all. Why did God choose Abraham, of all people, for this opportunity and responsibility? Truth be told, from the Torah itself, we know precious little about Abraham from before the moment of calling at the beginning of Genesis chapter 12. We know about his lineage, and we know his father Terach had already started the family on a journey from their homeland. But that's it. We know nothing about Abraham's character or personality, which certainly makes us curious how he got pegged for this important job as God's agent and partner in getting the people of the world to think about things differently than they had previously. And so, not surprisingly, the rabbis of the Midrash of rabbinic legend on the Torah jump in to fill this void of information and help explain for themselves, their generations, and Jews throughout the ages since what made Abraham special and different from those around him and prompted God to choose him. One such midrash is the famous story about Abraham breaking the idols in his father's idol store, which paints Abraham as a rationalist and an iconoclast willing to smash stone idols that, despite their popularity in the ancient Near Eastern society, can't possibly be God's, all the more so because, reasons Abraham in the midrash, they were just carved yesterday. But my favorite midrash about Abraham's calling is another one from the collection called Breshit Rabbah, and it starts with a parable. A man is traveling from place to place when he sees a bira doleket, most often translated as a castle or palace in flames. The man wonders aloud, could it be the case that this castle lacks a person to look after it and protect it and keep it from burning? At which point, the owner of the castle peeps his head out and says, I'm the owner of this castle. Abraham is then described as the traveler, and the castle is actually the world in flames. So he stops his journey and asks, could it really be the case that this world has no guide and no one to look after it? The owner of the castle is God, who responds to Abraham's concern and critique by peeping his head out, so to speak, and saying, I am the one who is the master of the world. And God then goes one step further and empowers Abraham as his partner in bringing God's name and presence to the world by calling upon Abraham and saying, Lech lecha, go now, journey to this land that I will show you. There's so much to think about in this powerful midrash. Why is Abraham the only one who stops if he perceives that the castle or the whole world is in flames? Surely others must have had the same reaction. Or did others just see the world on fire and shrug their shoulders and just avert their gaze and keep walking? And of course, another key question is, if God's really in charge of the castle or the world, and assuming God cares about it surviving and thriving, why would God let the flames rage unattended? We can try to answer both sides of the equation, the human and the divine, with the same explanation. We can argue that God created a world that is not intended to be perfect, that actually has many noticeable flaws amidst its incredible wonder and beauty. Some of those flaws existing because of chaos and randomness, and others because human beings can make poor and often destructive choices with the free will that God has gifted them, has gifted us. So imagine that at this early stage of humanity's existence, God is letting the castle or the world burn, at least for a time, as a test, while waiting for someone, anyone, from humanity to show enough concern to express outrage at the state of the world and effectively call out the architect, the master, God, for standing by while the world is in flames, refusing to believe that a benevolent and powerful God would remain on the sidelines while watching God's creation go up in smoke. Without that one human being who is troubled enough to speak out and brazenly castigate the master of the castle, the master of the world, God, when he saw a world on fire, Perhaps God would have despaired, just as had been the case in the age of Noah only 10 generations before this, and thrown in the towel on humanity and the world. But instead, God found hope and a willing human partner to work to put out the flames, to repair what was destroyed, and prevent the world from being consumed again, like it was in the day of the flood. And so God commissioned Abraham to his monumental task of bringing ethical monotheism to the world. But I want to introduce one more character, one more wrinkle to this story, and the character is the castle, or the world itself. I mentioned earlier that the words birah doleket are most often translated as a castle or palace in flames. But the word doleket, which is from the same root as the word that anchors our Shabbat and holiday candlelighting prayer, lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, or lahadlik ner shel Yom Tov, can also be interpreted as a light, a glow, or lit up. This alternative translation can upend the entire story here, because if a traveler walked by a castle or a palace that were alight, aglow, illuminated, lit up, maybe even at nighttime, with bright torches prominently featured on the tops of all the palace walls, if anything, that traveler might stop to admire the view and its majesty and beauty, rather than stop to wonder what was wrong with it and with the circumstances that led to it. In which case, it wouldn't have been shocking at all for most everyone to just keep on walking by, while Abraham was the one person who saw the flames and recognized trouble and danger. So which is it? Is it a castle in flames, a world on fire, or a castle aglow and illuminated and full of light? It's all a matter of one's individual perspective, one's interpretation not of just one Hebrew word, but of the circumstances in the world around us. And this message couldn't be more timely than on the eve of one of the most contentious and charged elections in recent U.S. history. Right now, there's a great divide in our country, on its most basic level, between those who believe our society couldn't be more broken or on fire, and those who believe that on balance, the castle is shining brightly and we should continue moving forward on our journey. I'm not here to tell you how you should interpret the word doleket, nor how you should view the state of our country, as most folks have come to their own conclusions about where things stand in our society. But I do want to make two very important points on this Shabbat before Election Day. First, whatever your take is on how things are going, and whichever direction you want them to go after November 3rd, please fulfill the Jewish value of civic responsibility and be sure to vote on Tuesday if you haven't yet cast a ballot. Throughout the ages, Jews have struggled to be recognized as full citizens in societies and countries throughout the world. And we are fortunate that in the United States, we have the right to vote, and our voices and our votes are counted just as much as everyone else's. So please use your voice and use your vote and embrace this vital civic duty. Second, regardless of how we interpret the birah doleket, whether we have a largely positive or largely negative view of our country's direction, please remember this. We are all, every one of us, travelers together in this journey, in our country, and partners in our world. Whether we are like Abraham and we call out because we see something that is in flames and needs to be fixed, or we are like the implied travelers who may not have seen any reason to stop at all because things look considerably brighter, each of us and all of us collectively share responsibility for the castle, for the palace, for our country, and for our world. After Tuesday, regardless of the outcome, we need to find ways to bridge the divides, to collaborate, to heal, and to rebuild. In this vein, I'd like to conclude my remarks by sharing a prayer written by my colleague, Rabbi Simcha Weintraub. We are living in a time of social fragmentation, in a climate of distrust, bigotry, and hatred, increasingly resulting in intimidation, hostility, and violence. May all in this Shereth Israel community and all of us in the larger community and in our country, people of every political party, age, gender identity, race, faith, tradition, ethnicity, reinforce their commitment to civil discourse, respectful disagreement, and joint constructive problem solving. Let us reaffirm and realize our mutual values and shared principles as Americans, our historic and priceless commitments to freedom and responsibility, equality and opportunity, democracy and justice, diversity and peace. Let us strengthen our community as an example of sustained cooperation, a paradigm of understanding and inclusion, a model of coexistence and getting past differences to reach for the common good. May we together accept the fair and unbiased election results, respecting the voice of the people and the rule of law, seeking paths of reconciliation and collaboration, and rebuilding a thriving and unified society. And let us all say, Amen.